Episode 2, Unbelievable Ability, Part 1. At Hampton's Pharmacy, first floor counter. Sir, I have some herbs here. I wonder if you're interested in buying them? Not long after Jake had adjusted his emotions, an honest-looking middle-aged farmer in a crumpled patch coat arrived. I have to examine the herb first. Although the middle-aged farmer wore plain clothes, Jake showed no contempt toward him. Okay. Following that, the middle-aged farmer took out a strange-looking grass. It resembled the network of nerves seen in humans. Nervile herb! Looking at the herb in the middle-aged farmer's hand, Jake's eyes flashed with surprise and excitement. Due to the aftermath of the battle, his meridians were damaged, so he could not perform cultivation. Right now, being unable to cultivate in a world filled with cultivators was his only worry. If he wanted to repair his damaged nerves and cultivate again, he had to procure some high-grade heavenly treasures or a grade 6 or higher pill. Suffice to say, stuff like that was way out of his budget. However, nothing could be said for certain in this world. Besides those precious heavenly treasures and pills, some rare herbs could also repair his nerves. However, herbs like those took centuries to mature, and he needed those in vast quantities. Sadly, herbs like those rarely made it into the market, so they were exceptionally scarce. If unavailable in large quantities, a single nervile herb, strictly over 10,000 years old, was enough to repair his damaged nerves. It was kinda like the unitary method. The collective age of the herbs should be over 10,000 years, so 2 5,000 years or 4 2,500 years. You get the gist, right? All in all, nervile herbs were extremely rare, and Jake needed them. Uncle, this type of medicinal herb is very rare, so I'll happily buy them. Just how many nervile herbs do you have? Suppressing his excitement, Jake brought back his calm and asked. As an employee of this shop, he had to remain calm in the face of precious herbs and treasures. Only by doing so could he obtain the greatest profit. I have 11 of these herbs here. How much can I get for them? Hearing Jake's analysis, the middle-aged farmer asked nervously. Only 11, Jake said, a bit disappointed. The nervile herbs that the farmer brought weren't that old, so he needed at least a few hundred 5-year-old nervile herbs. Those 11 nervile herbs could repair like 1% of his nerves. Furthermore, if he bought them off the farmer, they would belong to the Hampton family, not him. Neither the quantity nor the age of your herbs is satisfactory. Lowering his head in deep thought, Jake said with slight regret, One nervile herb is worth 15 copper coins. 11 would give you 165 copper coins. Can you accept it? A 5-year-old nervile herb was worth about 10 silver coins in the market, and 1 silver coin could be exchanged for 100 copper coins. In other words, the rate at which he was buying them was way too low. Jake lowered the price not only because he was doing business, but also because of his own plans. Sure. The middle-aged farmer was just a farmer from the vicinity of Lewiston town. He usually relied on farming to make a living, and occasionally set traps to capture ordinary wild beasts. Even so, 3 copper coins could keep his family well fed for an entire day, so 165 copper coins were almost 2 months of living expenses for him. More importantly, these 11 nervile herbs were something he had accidentally harvested while weeding his land. In summary, his trash was Jake's treasure, and the farmer was making money off the trash. Uncle, since this is your first time here, I'll pay you a bit more. Here are 170 copper coins. There you go. Jake took out the copper coins from the cabinet, counted them, and directly handed them to the middle-aged farmer. Then, he enthusiastically reminded him, If you find more medicinal herbs in the future, you can directly send them to me. I always pay a fair price. Already established as he was, Jake belonged to a side branch, and his status in the Hampton family was not really high from the bottom. However, he was still an employee of Hampton's pharmacy, so he had a salary of 10 gold coins per month. Apart from that, there were also profit commissions and year-end bonuses. In summary, he was quite satisfied with his income. 5 copper coins were nothing to him, but it was a kind gesture to the middle-aged farmer. This kindness was enough for him to come to Jake if he ever found any more medicinal herbs in the future. Jake made a few more trades before he saw the sky darkening. Since he could no longer see anyone in the shop, he counted the goods, locked the door, and returned to his own attic in the backyard. Finally, my precious nervile herb! Looking at the strange-looking grass in his hand that was as thick as chopsticks and shaped like human meridians, Jake could not help but sigh. While making the trade for the nervile herbs, Jake didn't lower the price because he was a ruthless merchant. It was because he wanted to keep one of them to himself, and he just couldn't afford it at its original price. Jake had always lived a life of peace and quiet in his previous life. After the transmigration, he did not have any thoughts of conquering the world or becoming a supreme overlord. He just wanted to live a stable life. However, after looking through the memory, Jake was convinced that only strength could buy him that peace and quiet he ever so desired. Ordinary people were just targets for bullying. Therefore, he had to cultivate and become strong. That was the only way to live a stable, peaceful life. The nervile herb emitted a very faint fragrance. After smelling this fragrance, Jake was surprised to find that he could feel pain in his previously unresponsive nerves. It is effective. However, the joy on his face soon disappeared before it could take a spot on his face. If only I had a few hundred of this herb right now. Jake shook his head in disappointment and then planned to consume this nervile herb. However, a strange thought suddenly entered his head. Something inside his head told him that it could replicate the nervile herb for him. How is this possible? Jake shook his head hard. He tried his best to get out of the strange reverie. Copy and paste were the simplest and most common computer programs in his previous life. At the same time, it was also the most powerful tool. As a programmer, Jake was well aware of the origin and abilities of this program. As long as a file existed on a computer, this tool could make an exact copy and paste it anywhere on the computer. However, it was just a computer program, not a tool available in real life. An ability like this in real life would be simply too unbelievable and fantastical. However, when he thought about it, transmigration, cultivation, talents, monsters, immortals, which one of them wasn't fantastical and unbelievable? It was common for those novel protags to get something like a golden finger, so why couldn't he get a mysterious and totally strange ability? Perhaps the heavens were on his side. After making up his mind, Jake did not hesitate at all and silently muttered in his heart, "Copy it first, then paste it here." As he silently activated the program in his heart, he discovered that, beside the nervile herb, the shadow of another nervile herb slowly appeared. At the same time, he felt a suction force in his mind. This force was directed at his blood, bones, and flesh. His originally solid body started to shrivel up as this suction force appeared. His originally pale face became even paler.